Hello, I'm Mary Ito, and welcome to the Cram Podcast. What does it mean to be human? I think a big part of it is our ability to have empathy, that we can identify with the feelings of others. It's an innate quality that we're born with. But what happens when people have little or no empathy at all? They harm others to get what they want. And even worse, they don't care. Well, now we've entered into a disturbing area of human behavior called the Dark Triad. It's a term that researchers Delroy Paulhus and Kevin Williams came up with over 10 years ago that encompasses the worst of human behaviors. Delroy Paulhus is a personality researcher and professor emeritus in the Department of Psychology at the University of British Columbia, and he joins us. Hi, Del.
Hi, Mary. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. Let me start off with this Dark Triad. Why did you decide to link these three personality traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, under this term called the Dark Triad?
Yeah, it was interesting when Kevin came as a new graduate student, and he posed the question of, I'm getting a lot of overlap among all of my questionnaires on dark personalities. And so we spent a year or so searching the literature, trying to figure out, well, how many dark personalities are there? Is there just one bad person and everybody else is good? Well, we discovered that pretty quickly, and we attacked it psychometrically. You do a factor analysis, and it's supposed to tell you how many different kinds of items you have. And it seemed from the literature and from our empirical work that there were three main dark personalities: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy could be separated enough, even though they seem to overlap both in the literature and in terms of psychometrics.
Just before we go on, maybe could you just briefly describe each one of those traits and why they're different and what they have in common?
Yeah, narcissism refers to the tendency of people to self-promote and want to draw attention to themselves and vigorously attack any kind of criticism. Doubling down is one phenomenon that you see in narcissists. You can get a lot of these. You can get it all from watching Donald Trump. Machiavellianism, a little harder to delve into because you don't know until they've got you that you've been bamboozled. So the classic there is Bernie Madoff, who was loved by everybody on Wall Street. They all thought he was a wonderful human being, empathic and friendly, etc. And they didn't find out till later he was stealing money from all of them. The third one, psychopathy, is really the most dangerous because of the impulsive nature of these people. They don't seem to care about victims. What they all have in common, according to our view, is lack of empathy or callousness. Like you said in your intro, that it's the key fault that all of these dark personalities have. It's played out in different ways for the narcissist, the Machiavellian, and the psychopath. But that's what they have in common.
You see this as being on a continuum, but there are extremes, right? I mean, there can be someone who has, a serious case of psychopathy, and they are super dangerous to society.
Yeah, and those are the kind of people that Steve Hart was referring to, because he deals with the disorder level. Not being a clinician, I deal with normal people. So even the high psychopathy people are at universities or in workforce. So they're managing to get along even flourishing. So you can have extreme cases, and they're particularly interesting. How are they doing it? How are they getting along while scoring so high on psychopathy? They are not under clinicians' care. They're not in jail, at least not yet. Maybe if we followed them long enough, the people high in psychopathy would be the most likely to end up in jail because of their impulsivity.
Mm-hmm. See, that is really interesting because now you mentioned Stephen Hart, and Stephen Hart is a psychologist, and we've had him on the show talking about psychopathy. So when you say you're looking at these, I guess, within the quote unquote normal range, I think many people would be surprised by that because I don't think a lot of people think that, oh, we all have a bit of psychopathy. We all have all of these qualities, right? Narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. But you're saying we do.
Yeah, it's just a matter of degree. It's part of normal personality to have these various traits. And so, for example, if you want to look at psychopathy among students, you have to look at the bad stuff that students do. They're not out killing people, but what they are doing is cheating. And so we spend a lot of time looking at cheating behavior among students. And indeed, it was the psychopaths who are the ones who cheated during exams. The Machiavellians are the ones who kind of cheated online by paying for essays, which they then turned in as their own. So each of those played out in a slightly different way, but they showed how this darkness in their personality was being applied to their situation.
And then what about the narcissist?
Well, narcissists have problems, but a different sort. They may be claiming things that are not true. They may be exaggerating their reports of their high school grades or engaging in other kinds of self-promotion, which may irritate people around them, may irritate the teachers. But again, applying it in the context of college students, they're still doing okay.
And you referred to Trump as having a narcissism. Why do you think that is?
Well, he's kind of the prototype, we would say, of a narcissist, and he pushes it to the nth degree. And you can see, I think I referred to doubling down. He does a lot of that. Whenever people say anything, even mildly critical of him to his face, he'll push it back twice as hard, never admitting the critique, and in fact pushing it even farther. Now, some people have told me they think Trump has all of the dark traits, and it's hard to tell in a way because extreme runaway narcissism, which he has, may explain pretty well everything he has. It's all about him. It's all about him gaining favor. And he's pretty upfront about it. If someone says something nice about him, he'll change his mind totally and say, oh, I used to hate that guy, but now I love him. And he will say it up front. So I don't think you necessarily need to add on the other dark traits to explain his behavior, but given that there overlap to a substantial degree, that's the big issue in studying the Dark Triad. You want to separate them, but you want to acknowledge the overlap, which is callousness. But at the same time, when you see one of the traits happening, there's a good chance one of the others is happening. So that's why we apply psychometrics, multivariate statistics, to try to pull them apart, tease apart these different traits. And at the same time, realizing that there's a better than 50-50 chance that if they have one, they'll have one of the other traits too.
Oh, is that right? There's a better than 50-50 chance.
Yeah, they do tend to go together and, in a sense, operate synergistically. But there are substantial differences. I'm not sure if I commented enough on those yet. The impulsivity is what distinguishes Machiavellians from psychopaths. So the psychopaths may end up incarcerated or at least under clinicians' care. It's going to ruin their lives because they just can't help it. Machiavellians may rise to prominence because they're more careful in promoting themselves. And so they may not necessarily be the gang leader, but they will be the gang advisor.
And when it comes to people who have narcissism, it's all about them, right? Is there a goal in mind for them? Like, is there something they're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I think it's ego promotion. So we have done a number of studies along those lines, trying to find out exactly what they're after. We tried to provoke people in the laboratory to see what it is that will make them aggressive. And what made narcissists aggressive was to insult them. So you set it up so that another student insults their essay. So even something as mild as that can provoke them into pressing the pseudo shock machine, which is often used to study aggression in the laboratory. So you can see that a personal insult is what really grabs the narcissist. It threatens them and they fight back. So it's all about saving their ego, promoting their ego.
And there's also a fourth trait that's part of this group, making it I guess a tetrad, sadism. Now, why is that another trait that you've included?
Yeah, in a sense, that's our biggest contribution because the other three have been studied up the kazoo for many years. Everyday sadism is something new because people used to think of sadism either in sexual terms, like the Marquis de Sade, or the criminal sadist who does cruel things before they murder people. But we looked around the world, and maybe we're more sensitive than a lot of people, but we see sadism everywhere. If you go from sports, hockey is certainly a classic one. If you've been to a hockey game, you can recall big applause for goals, ecstasy for the fights. The whole crowd jumps to their feet and screams in joy. It's like orgasmic to watch the hockey players fight with each other. And and that's kind of rarely acknowledged, except to say it's part of the game. And so that's why people will come to see games in many cases, and people will watch it on TV. So a lot of sports are violent, and a lot of people like to see people being aggressive toward each other, being hurt. Great, adds to the joy. So violent sports is one, but perhaps more blatant these days is watching the cruelty in films, on television, and especially video games where you can participate in it.
So what do you think? I mean, what's at the core of that? Why would we be attracted to something that is violent, that signals possible death?
It's a really good question because it's easy to come up with an evolutionary explanation for the other three Dark Triad members. But it makes you wonder, why would it be part of our genes? Why would it be retained? And Steven Pinker has written a book on how cruelty has evolved over the years. According to him, it used to be worse. I won't even mention some of the things that have happened in history as far as cruelty goes. The bread and circuses in the Colosseum in Rome, it was all about cruelty. And now you don't have as many opportunities. People used to flock to executions. Even in Canada, the kindler and gentler people of the North, it's been part of the human condition as far back as we can acknowledge. And we have our empathic motivations, which work against enjoying such entertainment.
No, it's a real puzzle. You're right,
Yeah.
especially when you bring up empathy. Because if that is innate within us, why wouldn't we understand the feelings of the victim? But is it because we are empathic, we understand the feelings of both? That's very confusing, though, of both sides.
Yeah, I think we're both.
Yeah.
I think back to watching a fight in a hockey game once, and one guy got really pummeled and fell to the ice and was twitching on the ice. And the whole crowd that was ecstatic before, when they saw this guy twitching, went silent. And they carried him off. And he kind of stuck up his hand and waved to the crowd, and they cheered again. So these are the same people. I'd love to see you get hurt, but we're feeling for you now. So the human condition involves a lot of different motivations. So people can be both empathic and enjoy the cruelty at the same time, the same people.
Now you said that the other three traits, so not sadism, but Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism, can be explained through evolution. Yeah. So how is that? Because, you would think, you're right. I mean, they all still exist, but why?
Yeah, they're all in our gene pool. And, well, it's all about reproduction. As far as evolution goes, that's the only thing that matters. If you can reproduce, you're getting your genes into the gene pool. The more you can reproduce, the more strongly your genes will continue over time. And if you think about narcissism, is all about confidence, which can attract mates. Machiavellianism, you can manipulate people into having sex with you. Well, that works in a different way. And psychopaths can force themselves upon people, and they're very impulsive. So their sexuality will be operating much more quickly, say, than the Machiavellians, who may take time to get mates, but eventually all three of them, in different ways, will attract mates, and that's what counts. Get your reproduce and get your genes in the pool, and apparently it still works.
And also, I'm thinking, with all three of them, if these people are able to rise to power, that can be another attractive aspect of them, right? Which makes them attractive to mates.
Yeah, power per se, in a sense, it's closely linked to reproduction. One could say that, what did Kissinger say? Power is erotic. And even he, an odd-looking dude, would get a lot of women, he says, because of his power. He was arguably the most powerful person in the United States, more powerful than the president, because he was giving the advice on how to make decisions. So, yeah, there's a close link there.
And when we've been talking about these traits and people who have these traits, I guess for me, and maybe many people who are listening and watching, they assume we're talking about men. Because right away, I have a picture of a man when I'm talking about these things. And these traits are most commonly found in men. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked that question because that's been a big discussion in our laboratory. Overall, all of those dark measures, men score higher. But there's a new line of research that's coming out because people say, well, hey, there are mean girls out there, and they act sadistic too, the way they can destroy the lives of some of their friends. They use different methods, and the standard argument is that they use innuendo, gossip, and even facial expressions to mock their fellow friends, and it can really mess up the lives of their friends.
Yeah, I could see that. Although, I'm just thinking when you talk about hurting, yes, I can see that with some women. But when you talk about harm, like actual physical harm, I'm wondering whether there really is a sexual distinction there, and whether at the extreme end, and so we're talking about people with really a serious case of psychopathy, let's say, or sadism, who, are violent, who torture, who kill. I'm just wondering, would there be more men? And would there always be more men on that end?
I think so.
Mm.
I think the tradition, the culture in which men are brought up in is about physical competitiveness and using violent methods, how to fight and how to hurt people physically. So they, in the long run, I think they'll always be that way.
Doesn't biology come into that as well? I mean, they have more testosterone. And also, I'm just thinking about this. They don't have children. Women have children. Women bear babies. So that's got to factor into this as well. We're set up to have kids.
Well, yeah, you think about the role of evolution for men and women. For women, it was to look after their babies for long periods of time, often throughout childhood. The men's role was to fight off competitors. And so that was their job. And they seem to naturally drift in that direction. There is a big mystery, though, about why women would care about nasty men. And that keeps coming up. You get ratings of domineering men are way higher than submissive men. And even men who have been reported to have been cruel seem to attract women. Guys in prison get loads of letters, proposals of marriage, especially the most famous ones. Ted Bundy, for example. What's going on there? I can't answer that question, but I think there's more mystery there involved in women's sexuality more than men's sexuality.
Mm. I want to talk as well about bad behavior, nasty behavior when it comes to social media, because there's so much of that. And I know you've done research as well on online trolling.
Yeah.
What have you found with that?
Yeah, in a way, trolling is the sadism of the internet. It's an opportunity that was not available before the internet became wide open, and people can say anything they want, and there are no repercussions. The typical troll tries to find happy people and destroy their happiness. So you get a fan club, I don't know, Taylor Swift fan club. They'll go on there and make really nasty comments, and they'll get responses, then they'll say, great responses, and they'll fight and give themselves opportunities to say even more nasty things. And they get the reaction that they want. Hence the recommendation, don't feed the trolls, because that's what they want. They want to find happy people and make them unhappy, and it works.
Do you know whether these people, these online trolls, are they purposely going after these groups? It's not as if they happen to find these groups and then they make these, awful remarks. That's their intent, to go find these groups and then to make terrible remarks to make these people uncomfortable, unhappy, upset.
I think so. And we correlated it with the Dark Tetrad measures. And guess which of the Dark Tetrad measures correlated most strongly? Everyday sadism. So if you generally report yourself as enjoying hurting people, indeed, your reports about your activities on the internet do involve finding opportunities to have fun. And that was the title of our article, Trolls Just Want to Have Fun. And they report that's their motivation for going on there, is the enjoyment they get when they get a reaction from people who are, well, they know they're going to make them unhappy because the target sites were chosen for people who have a great happiness from their popular entertainer or whatever they're into, whether it's rose gardening or anything. It doesn't take long before a troll appears there, and people fight back a little bit. They shouldn't, but they do. And the troll just wallows in that kind of harm to others.
What does that say about human behavior, and the way we act when we think there aren't any repercussions, or when nobody, or perhaps even when no one's watching, right? I mean, how do we behave when we think no one is really watching us?
Well, that unfortunately leads to a very cynical conclusion, and that's the real human behavior you're getting after you take away all the social sanctions. Then you're getting what people are really like. And I don't think that's entirely true. People say a lot of nice things online too, but it does give opportunity to those people who lack empathy, who have one of the dark tetrad tendencies. It gives them an opportunity to do those things that they didn't have before. But are people really nasty deep down? I think everybody has a touch of that, and it shows up when somebody does something nasty to you. We've asked people whether they've actually thought about getting revenge on people, and everyone has thought about it. Only a fraction of those people have actually carried it out.
Well, thank goodness only a fraction act on that revenge impulse. I think that's a good thing. And the other thing I wonder too, and it's what we were talking about earlier, that, we all have these dark traits to a lesser or greater degree, right? Because of that continuum. I'm wondering whether these traits can be beneficial, right? I mean, we must need them even a little bit, because we do have them all, right? So, I mean, can you think of examples of how they can actually be beneficial?
Yeah. Well, the selection of these traits into our gene pool, of course, took place a long time ago when life was different. So they may not apply as advantages today, but you can certainly think of narcissists seem to have an advantage in leadership issues because they have the confidence and they have the go-get-'em motivation. You think about Steve Jobs, for example, who's done more to change technology than any human being in history, and yet his own people hated him. His own people fired him. And it was only when the company started losing money that they had to bring him back. And then he invented a couple of other fabulous technologies. So Machiavellianism certainly works in the real world because it's low key and it's indirect, and people don't necessarily know what you're doing. Psychopathy, could that be an advantage in the real world? Well, there are situations, we call them dark niches, where it actually does help to be willing to do this stuff. So a hockey goon, for example, it used to be that each hockey team had a guy whose job was to beat up people and not much else. The Army staff sergeant who trains recruits is as nasty as possible. So they get used to it, and it builds up their moral fiber, I guess, or their resistance, I would say, to stress. So there are these dark niches where these people can be useful to society. They would be terrible if all of us were like that.
I'm curious to know when you go out to, social events, parties, whatever, and people find out what you do, what's their response?
Well, I usually try to cover it up by saying, yeah, I just do survey research and don't want to get into the details too much. Survey research sounds as boring as possible. So
It does.
so that's what I do.
Because I think, if I was to meet you and I found out you did this work, I mean, at first I'd want to know all about it, which is why I'm doing this interview, but I'd also want to know why you do it. Like, why do you do this specific kind of research?
Yeah, I think I need a psychoanalyst to answer that question. I can think historically it makes sense. My advisor at Columbia University was the guy who invented Machiavellianism. That is, took Machiavelli, the old philosopher, and made it into a personality variable. Then I worked with Bob Hare at UBC, the emperor of psychopathy research.
Yes,
And,
yes.
And Narcissism came along. It really changed when the first questionnaire version of psychopathy came in 1981, I think it was. And that allowed for large-scale research rather than relying on clinicians' reports of their explanations of their patients. For example, narcissism goes way, way back to psychoanalysis, but you have to take the word for it that psychoanalysts could see both self-promotion and deep insecurity in the same people. And they say, well, that's because I worked with these people for years and I could get a deep sense of what was going on. But of course, that's a small number of subjects. You can't get the large-scale samples until recently that you could do it with these questionnaires.
I'm just wondering though. I mean, you could have changed your mind, right? You could have studied goodness or happiness or something else. What's kept you in this field so long?
Yeah, I think the dark people are just a lot more interesting, I find, than the shiny, happy people. I think it was Tolstoy said a long time ago, happy families are all the same. The unhappy families are unhappy in different ways. And I think that applies to traits too. Perfectly well-adjusted people, they're all the same. You get people who are on the dark side, and there's a whole lot of ways of being dark. And so it makes it a lot more challenging. And these people are just more attractive to research, to me anyway.
We mentioned Stephen Hart, who was, one of your students. And I remember he said that his area, which is psychopathy, it's not a popular area. He told me it's very difficult to get funding because who wants to fund research on psychopaths because they've got a bad reputation. And I don't know how you feel about the work you do, and maybe it's misunderstood, these traits. Maybe, I don't know, is it important for you to bring more awareness and clarity to this field?
I think for me, it's scientific curiosity for the most part. There are political reasons. You run into political barriers at some point. People really don't like the idea of psychopathy having a genetic basis, because that means that you can't change them. And that runs up against our Western assumption that everybody can be anything they want. So if you have genetic tendencies built in, it kind of contradicts the fairness of society.
Well, this was absolutely enlightening for me, Del. Just a fascinating discussion. I really appreciate your joining us today and giving your time to us.
It's been my treat. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you. That is Delroy Paulhus. He is a personality researcher and professor emeritus in the Department of Psychology at UBC. If you'd like to learn more about his work and research, you can check out our show notes. That is it for today's Cram podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. And we would also appreciate it if you would follow us on social. Our handle is @CramIdeas. And please give us a review if you can. Thanks for joining us, and see you back here next time.